15th, we'll have our fourth and final workshop, and that one's going to be dedicated to how to create a submission, how to tailor it to the judging criteria. And without further ado, Dr. Nathan Furr.
I think I have this. I'm just going to grab this slide. Okay, you can hear me, right? I can tell. I can hear it back there. So welcome. I guess you're all as crazy as me to be here, right? Because it's snowing outside and you're here. So thanks for being here. Really two parts to the presentation today. The first is to talk a little bit more about the business model competition and hopefully, help us. Let's see, maybe I'll have to operate this manually. Let's see, I see a USB key. I see it's in there, but it's not quite recognizing it yet. So I'm going to push it to the other side. All right, we'll see if that works. It's okay. And so first part, talk about the business model competition. Maybe it helps to hear it from me. I'll try to keep it brief. We did start the business model competition, 3 years ago now, when I arrived at BYU and was saying, gosh, we're really missing some things. And this has obviously, as you know, grown to kind of a scale and an impact that we couldn't have imagined. So, and the second thing is to talk to you about this really important topic of pivoting. And hopefully what I'm going to share with you is some new insights from research that you can take with you for life, but also that will help you in the competition. So, if you could advance the slide. Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's okay. You guys have covered this, right? When I talk about the business model competition, it's not a business plan competition in the traditional sense. And what do I mean by that? We're not rewarding a product. So when I started this, the way I looked at business plan competitions is there was a product, and it was this presentation. It had a lot of hot air in it. So we saw a lot of people, getting up there and saying how great their product was and how they have this huge market and they're going to totally dominate it. And then we give them prize money and they'd go either buy a car or they go, execute on their plan and fail. And we're like, gosh, man, there's a better way. So in this competition, we're rewarding the process you went through. We're rewarding testing your assumptions, and we're even rewarding recognizing you're wrong and making changes if they're needed. All right, thanks. Okay. 3 keys to doing well in the business model competition, in my mind, are 1, identify your assumptions. Every new business has assumptions. You can use the business model canvas as a tool to help you keep track of those things. When we do the international version, I usually judge it with, Steve Blank, Tom Eisenman, Alex Osterwalder. Alex is the guy who wrote the Business Model Generation. He created the business model canvas. So we tend to use that. It doesn't mean it's the only tool. But the point is, if you don't identify and write down your assumptions, you end up spending a lot of time, spinning your wheels a lot. So number 1, we want you to identify your assumptions. Then 2, test those assumptions with customers using rapid, innovative, cheap, reliable tests. And then, if you find out you're wrong, which most of the time you'll find out that something wasn't quite right about your guess, pivot, change, and don't be afraid to tell us a story. We want to hear the story. Remember, we're rewarding the process you went through. So, some surprising examples of this. Some of my, just some fun stories to illustrate this. So, IBM. You guys have heard of IBM. One of my favorite stories about validating if there was a problem worth solving was way back in the day when they first wanted to explore voice-to-text recognition. Voice-to-text recognition. Now imagine, if you wanted to do voice-to-text recognition, what would it take to do that well? I mean, you'd have to develop software, you'd have to develop microphones, you'd have to, get some really sophisticated voice recognition software, you'd have to, make sure you adjust it for diction and dialogue and all these kind of things that you see current software struggling with. But they did something radically more simple to validate whether anybody cares. Next one. They hung a sheet in a room. And on one side of the sheet, you were there on that side, you were the customer. You'd start talking, and I'd be hidden behind the sheet. As you talked, I'd be typing out what you said, and you'd see it appear on the screen. And they were just testing, does anybody care? Is this even worth developing? And of course, your reaction was, this is amazing, I love this. I could save all this money on transcription and all these kind of things that we used to do in the old days. So that was a great example of validating, is there even a problem we're solving here? Another one I love, much more recent, Coin. Have you guys seen Coin? Yeah, okay, so for those of you who don't know, it's basically a little plastic card that replaces your existing credit cards, gift cards, rewards cards. You can use your iPhone, your smartphone to load on a number of these cards onto a single card. So people like me, like I'm feeling, I don't have my wallet in because I hate carrying it because it's so fat, right? Not because I've got lots of money, just because I've got all those darn cards, And so the point is this could replace it with one card. How did these guys test whether they had a solution people cared about? They threw it up online. Pre-order for 50% off. Actually, if you go back one. I want to point out, starts shipping summer 2014. So I'm going to pay $55 right now for something I can't get for 8 or 9 months. But people really cared about this solution, and so they started pre-ordering. Okay, next one. They're even open about it. They said, why are you charging me immediately for my pre-order? And they basically say, creating new devices is expensive. As a young company, we're going to take your money now, and we're going to use it to develop. So they're totally open about it. So as you go about this process of identifying your assumptions, testing them, and pivoting, you may say, yeah, but how are the judges going to know what I did? And the answer is, you're going to share with us the evidence. You're going to share with us, I talked to X number of customers. They said this. They hated it. I decided based on what they said, I should change to something else. I went out and showed it to them. They loved it. You're going to give us those kinds of data and details, and we're going to be thoughtful. We know that if you're doing something Web 2.0, you can talk to a zillion people like that, versus if you're doing business-to-business enterprise sales, it's a lot harder to talk to people. We can recognize and adjust for those things, but you want to tell us the story and give us the evidence. All right. Okay, enough about business model competition. I want to talk about pivots. And next one. Tell you the story of PayPal. Most of you guys have probably used PayPal. You know them as the payment solution where you send money via email. But they didn't really start out that way. So Max Levchin, who was really the technical mind underneath PayPal, he actually started out by developing a security software solution. So in the old days, if you wanted a secure system, you actually had a little physical device that generated numbers, random numbers, and those were linked to the system. And you had to enter that little password to get access to the system. And system administrators were carrying around pocketfuls of these things. If you were a system administrator, you might carry on 20 or 30 sometimes. And Max Levchin said, you know what? I bet I could figure out how to do this security more simply and do it on a single device, on a handheld device. And he did that, and he posted it online, and people were downloading it. And he thought, gosh, maybe I could build a company around making security software simple. So he met up with Peter Thiel, who you probably know, at a lecture in Terman Engineering at Stanford. And they said, let's form a company. Let's make security software for handheld devices. And all they were really going to create is essentially software libraries. So they weren't going to develop applications. They were just going to provide you the base code that you could use in your application. So they launched the company, and nothing happens. Nobody's really buying it. Nobody's really that interested. And so they say, oh my gosh, we got to pivot, we got to change. So then they say, well, what if we actually created the applications? Let's create applications for handheld devices. Now, I know in today's world, you know, the iPhone world, we're all familiar with apps and we're very comfortable with them, but think back, this is in the PDA days, like the Palm Pilot days, pre-iPhone. You know, first iPhone didn't have apps on it, like an app store, by the way. You know, so this is before apps became really popular. So they said, let's do apps for businesses, you know, Blackberries and Palm Pilots and things like that. And, you know, they got a little bit of customer interest, but not much. And they pursued that for a while and they said, nah, that's not it. What if we made consumer applications for their handheld devices? They tried that for a while. Didn't work. What if we made an electronic wallet that would have all your passwords and stuff in it? Problem is it had a really simple substitute, and that was the wallet that most people carry. I'm not carrying right now. But, you know, that didn't work. So then they said, gosh, what if we could send money via email? Sorry, send money via Palm Pilot, you know, beam money, you know, Palm Pilot to Palm Pilot. And that was the actual application that got people interested. And in fact, a venture capitalist in a little, beamed $5 million from his Palm Pilot to Peter Thiel's Palm Pilot at a breakfast meeting in a big publicity stunt. And you know, initial traction looked good for PayPal. They were getting like 300 users a day downloading the software. Then it kind of tapered off. About the same time, they were asking themselves, well, what if we could what about people who don't have Palm Pilots? How do I send money from my Palm Pilot to somebody who doesn't have a Palm Pilot? What if we could attach the money to an email? And so they said, yeah, let's make that as a little extra feature, and they put up a website, and the website was really pushing the Palm Pilot version. But then they started to get all these emails from these people at eBay. At first, they're like, man, I want those eBay people to go away. They're sketchy. They're like multi-level marketing people. You know, I always love that. And then they kept getting more requests, and they thought, gosh, maybe we should pay attention to these guys. So finally, they approved it, and they said, okay, fine. Use our logo on your eBay sites and stuff like that. Pretty soon, they noticed that the Palm Pilot topped off at about 10,000 users, and the email-to-email payments was about 3 million. And they realized, ooh, I think email-to-email is our real business, and they shut down the Palm Pilot application. Why do I tell you that? This is a company we know and respect today, but look how many changes they went through before they really found the right match between the problem and the solution. And this is true of, I would argue, almost every company you know. Many of you probably use Symantec antivirus applications. That's not what Symantec was founded to do. Symantec was actually founded to do artificial intelligence software. And when that market didn't work out, they went to natural language processing. And when that market didn't work out, then they tried this crazy antivirus thing that became their core business. And I could go on and on. Each time these companies are making pivots. And why do we say the word pivot? It's an evocative word. When we say pivot, we mean change, but we kind of mean a special kind of change. So like in basketball, the idea in basketball is you keep one foot planted and you can move the other foot, right? So when we say pivot, what we're saying is you keep one foot planted in what you've learned while you adapt. So it's not throwing everything away and just jumping from thing to thing like a little bullfrog in a game, you know, in Frogger, whatever it was. It's actually using what you've learned and building on that. Okay. Pivots, go ahead and click. Adjust, back. Help us adjust to uncertainty. So when you're doing a new business, there's so much unknown. They help us correct for failure. They help us leverage what we've learned, and they feel good because you're making progress, right? You're getting better. But there's a good question, which is, are all pivots good? And I love this poor little mountain goat stuck here, probably in a fjord in Norway. So to answer this question, we launched a research project in which we did a couple things. One, we did a multi-case study, so we followed 10 innovative companies over the period of a year. and I interviewed the founders and some of the co-founders every few months to track what they were doing, what were they learning, what was actually happening. And then we compared this to a convenience sample of corporate innovators who are also trying to bring new products to market and trying to understand what are the goods and the bads, or the do's and the don'ts of pivoting. And here's a couple guidelines we found out. I'll motivate it with the story of Dan. Dan was a guy who was trying to create some task management software, maybe something like Asana, if any of you guys have used Asana, something akin to that. Noticed a huge problem from his experience in the corporate world, started to develop it, super into pivots. Eric Ries and Steve Blank, they're friends and colleagues of mine. He was a huge follower of Eric Ries. I'm going to pivot my way to success. I'm going to rock it, and Dan would get a little bit of feedback from customers and make a big change, and he'd notice his metrics. He was measuring disappointment. So the disappointment test is you ask your customers, how disappointed would you be if you couldn't use this software tomorrow? And so he'd make a big change and it'd go up a little bit. He'd make a big change and it'd go up a little bit. And he just kept doing this, right? But it never really seemed to take off. And he was always just agonizing and stressing out like, oh, should I pivot or not? I don't know. What does the data say? And Dan was kind of caught in this pivoting paranoia. And so I'll share a few lessons that can help you know when and how to pivot and what you're really looking for. So number one, pivot cycles. The more successful entrepreneurs didn't ask themselves 24 hours a day, should I pivot? 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 Instead, they gave themselves 2 to 3 month cycles. This is just a rule of thumb. You guys who are super early, you might give yourself less time. You might give yourself 2 weeks. But 2 to 3 month cycles, we saw this at PayPal, Intuit, Amazon, Mondelez, a lot of the other startups who I can't name because I told them I would give them anonymity. What this cycle does is, when you go out and talk to customers with any new innovation, you're not, even if you've hit the nail on the head, you're still going to get some skepticism. You're still going to get people who are jerks and won't return your call or who just see the world totally differently. You have to spend a little bit of time with it to cut through and see what the real patterns are. I like to compare this to the slow blade theory. So if any of you guys have seen or read the movie Dune, next one. There's this, in the movie they have, in the book they have this armor that deflects quick attacks, like a rapid attack. But what kills you is the slow blade that's inserted slowly into the armor, right? And so the same idea or analogy could be applied to pivoting. If you go out there and you talk to one person, they're super negative, and you pivot, and you talk to somebody and they're negative, and you pivot, and they're negative, and you just will pivot all over the place. You won't ever see the real pattern. It's kind of like if a pharmaceutical company tried to reformulate the drug between every single patient. You never converge on anything, right? Similar way, what you're really getting at is not what are the little minor attacks that will bounce off my armor. What's the real persistent danger here that could kill my company? So 2 to 3 month cycles, super early for students, I would say 2 to 3 weeks. But you're trying to see the patterns. Next one, you got to pivot broadly early on. So focus matters a lot. But at the same time, you got to focus at the right time. So a lot of times I have students come to me and say, gosh, I don't know if I should be pivoting now or later, or should I be looking broadly, or should I be focusing on one thing? Early, go broad. Go broad. Look at lots of things. Even maybe try things in parallel. One of my favorite examples of this is actually a big company, Sony. So back in the day, when we didn't have very good rechargeable batteries for things like laptops and phones, really the only solutions were, kind of nickel-based. And they weren't great, and there was a real race to develop rechargeables for the new generation of electronics. And at the time, most people thought lithium was crazy. I mean, metallic lithium would explode on contact with air. The only lithium-based batteries were little button-sized batteries that had to have hazardous product listings with them. And so all the, Matsushita and Sanyo were all betting on nickel, metal hydride, and all these technologies. And Sony was like, let's go for it with lithium. But we know there's a ton of uncertainty. So they actually launched 6 projects in parallel. And rather than let those projects run for like 2 years and then see what happens, every single month, they basically did a pivot cycle where they would evaluate, where are we? What do we need to adjust? Where are we? What do we need to adjust? And eventually, one of those 6 parallel projects yielded what we know is the contemporary lithium battery that's in all your laptops. And they got a 4-year head start on all their competitors, and all their competitors had to follow them. So, third thing, pivots feel good. And like our friend Dan, you might see little teeny incremental progress, but don't forget you're really looking for what we call pivot takeoff. And that is after a certain number of pivots, you're going to start to see a real increase in customer interest. If you don't start seeing a real interest in customer interest, you might ask yourself, is this problem really worth solving? One question that Dan never really asked himself, because if he would have seen this chart, my guess, Dan's a smart guy. Actually, go back if you would. He would have said, gosh, I'm doing all this work and all these changes. It's just kind of flatline. Is there something I'm not seeing? And I would argue in Dan's case that task management, it's actually a tough space. You have about a bazillion competitors. And let's be honest, what do most of us really want out of task management? Somehow magically help me get my stuff done, And so there's a lot of kind of latent skepticism about new tools. So he was just in a hard space. And I would argue that maybe Dan could have applied some of his techniques and skills to a different problem or a different solution. Fourth thing I'll say is don't stop pivoting, even after you get pivot takeoff. Remember PayPal, when they got the $5 million for the Palm Pilot to Palm Pilot version? That was a pretty cool solution. But it wasn't their kind of optimal outcome, right? Their optimal outcome was the email-to-email solution. And my favorite example of this is a company called Aardvark, which did social search. And I'll just show you up here on this. Nope, go back, please. One, you send a question to Aardvark, and the example is, what's a great biking path around Golden Gate Park? The Aardvark sends it to your social network, and you get their response in a few minutes. And the example is, my favorite is a secret trail that takes you to the beach. And the idea was there are questions you want to ask that Google just can't answer for you, or that Google can't answer in a personalized enough way for you. So maybe your friends could answer that better than for you. And these guys did some fabulous stuff to test their assumptions. For example, rather than actually building the software, they totally faked it. So in the early days, if you were using Aardvark and you were part of their small sample of test users, and you sent a question to your social network, it didn't actually go to your social network because there was no software to do that. Instead, they just shipped it to Mechanical Turk. They had a bunch of people who they're paying like 3 cents a question, go out and do a Google search, answer the question, send it back. They'd aggregate the most common answer and give that to you. But they're just trying to figure out, does anybody even care? Eventually, we'll figure out how to make the software that does that. And sure enough, people did care. And they were iterating on it, and they were pivoting, and they built this really interesting solution. They got to about 100,000 users, and it was looking great. I think it did end pretty well, but they did have one nagging problem. And that was people kept asking for 2 features over and over. And that was they wanted a frequently asked question list, and they wanted a searchable list of past questions. And the founders were like, no way. Like, that's not our vision. That's just going to make us like Yahoo, And they just resisted for a long time. Well, they were acquired by Google. Okay, so good. Good news. Actually, a great outcome. You know, they actually had a very nice financial exit. But I have to ask myself, if folks like that were so good at testing their assumptions, I mean, they were so good at faking it, could they have tested whether customers cared about those other two features? Because unfortunately, after Google acquired them, they got shut down. So here's a little kind of joke. Ask a question, I'll find you the answer. And the question is, you are my favorite aardvark in the whole world. Why did Google decide to shut you down? And I guess the answer might be, there was a hill of opportunity that aardvark climbed. But there was a mountain of opportunity next door called Quora, which really in many ways offers essentially the two features that customers were asking aardvark for. So don't stop pivoting, because you know, there might be something even better out there. And I hear stories about this all the time. You're making progress, it's looking good, you know, but don't be afraid to look up from your own little neighborhood and say, gosh, is there something out there? And I would have argued that aardvark didn't have to give up their core business. They could have launched a simple test to see if there was really something there. So back to the business model competition. Last thing I want to say about pivots. I've sometimes heard through the grapevine that students feel like, yeah, you know, you got to tell the story of how you had these dramatic pivots to do well in the business model competition. And here's my view on that. It may look like that on the surface, but there's a couple areas where things you might not be seeing that I want to share that could help you. Number one, why does it look like everybody's pivoting? Because most people, most of you, some part of your guess has to be wrong. It's not your fault. You're operating under uncertainty. By definition, some part of your guess will be wrong unless you're an industry veteran who's been in the industry 20, 30 years. And on a quick scan, I don't see many of those folks in here. You know, but even then, you're going to get things wrong. So it's okay. So that's why pivoting is so common. But on the other hand, we don't want you to pivot for the sake of pivoting. And this is the point I wanted to get to. One of the areas where people flub up the most in the business model competition is they'll be like, we did this, and then we pivoted. We did this, and then we pivoted. We did this, and then we pivoted. And you know what's going on in the judge's mind? Why? What's the evidence? Because like my friend Dan, you can over-pivot. You can react to those quick attacks and not really be seeing the slow blade that's killing you. So we want to hear is, okay, you pivoted, but why? What informed the pivot? What led you to the decision that this was the right direction to go? Don't just tell me you pivoted over and over. We want to see the evidence. Help us understand it. Help us see it. And I'll just close with the story of a friend of mine, Mike Cassidy. Mike Cassidy built, 3 companies that were worth over $1 billion. His most recent one was called Ultimate Arena. It was a video game startup. Mike's not a gamer, but he met up with the champion of Doom. Any of you guys ever play Doom? Yeah, it's first-person shooter. Yeah, don't be ashamed. Well, okay, so Microsoft did a study of what software was installed on people's computers. Number 2 was Microsoft Windows. Number 1 software in the world was Doom. So this was, don't be ashamed. You're in good company. Number 1 software installed in computers in the world at the time that Doom was big was Doom. And this guy Thresh, he was like the world champion of Doom. They had some super nerdy competition and he won it. So Mike Cassidy and Thresh hook up to create Ultimate Arena, right? And Ultimate Arena is, basically you could come online, you meet up with a group of people, you put in like $1, whoever wins the game wins the pot. And, they get lots of press and PR and Thresh is out, pushing the solution. And it's looking good because, user adoption's going up. And everybody's like, woohoo, we're doing great. But Mike Cassidy's kind of like, let's take a deeper look at the numbers. Is it really true we're doing well? Because he started to notice something. He started to notice people would join, use it for a while, and then never come back. So he's the CEO, and he starts calling these people up and saying, hey, just wondering why you're not using Ultimate Arena. I'm like, kind of sucks, If I play like poker with my friends, I know you guys don't play poker, but these guys play poker. If I were, I know I might win this Friday and lose next Friday, but I win the Friday after that. It all comes around. But when I'm online with this Ultimate Arena, there's all these weird people from all, I don't even know who they are, and they're just taking my money. It feels like a kid getting his candy taken away on Halloween or something. It just feels bad, So Mike goes back to the team, says, listen, we got to change something. Now, the people who had not been on the phone calls were saying things like, oh, we can fix this. We just need to fix the rating system a little bit, or we just need to fix, how much money, what percentage of the pot we take. And Mike's like, you can try that stuff, but you got to look at what does the evidence say. And the evidence says people are fundamentally not liking this experience. So Mike keeps making phone calls, and what he eventually figures out is what people really want is they kind of want to hook up with their friends, like the poker game. So eventually Mike has to do what the CEO does. About half the company's saying, let's stick with Ultimate Arena. About half the company's saying, we got to pivot. Mike says, we're going to pivot. The data says pivot. So he pivots and he creates an instant messenger called Xfire. For some reason that sounds wrong, but Xfire. And it basically allows you to meet up with your buddies on instant messaging and then sucks you into the video game of your choice. That was successful. And they eventually sold that for like $300 million to Vivendi, which I'd be thrilled with. So anyway, thank you for listening. I hope you gathered something that was useful about pivoting and for the business model competition. I'll turn it over to the team to take us from there.
All right, thank you, Dr. Furr. So that concludes this portion of the workshop. And once again, I just want to remind you the next workshop is on January 14th. It's going to be a submission workshop, so we'll see you there.